All right, we're going to call to order the April 8th, 2025 regular Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Everybody stand for the invocation and pledge. Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, Lord God. Thank you for all the many blessings that you've given us, Lord. Please bless our citizens. Please bless our first responders and our city staff, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Chair Lomneck,
Here.
Vice Chair Forges,
Here.
Member Keller,
Here.
Member Shekel,
Here.
Member Galvin,
Here.
Member Butler.
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right, no consent agenda. Can I get an approval for the minutes of the Planning and Zoning meeting March 20th?
So moved.
Second, anybody?
I second that.
We got a motion to approve by Member Keller and a second by Vice Chair Forges. Let's go ahead and vote. Passes. All right, no old business. New business, 283 10th Avenue, Cox Property Annexation Rezoning from Orange County R2 to City of Ocoee R1, Project AX 022501 and RZ 250201. We'll have two motions on this, so go ahead.
Did I click the wrong thing? Okay, there it is. Sorry about that. Okay, good evening, everyone. I'll be presenting on the Cox Property Annexation and Rezoning application for their property located at 283 10th Avenue. So for issues, it is whether or not the city should annex the property in from Orange County and whether to rezone it from County R1 to City, from County R2 to City R1.
Sorry, is your mic on?
Oh, it's lit. Okay, is that better?
There you go.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, again, it's for 283 10th Avenue. Issues whether or not the city should annex the property from Orange County and to rezone it from County R2 to City R1. Okay, so a little bit of background on the property. It's located at the intersection of 10th and Peters Avenue. It is 0.36 acres. The property is eligible for annexation. It is adjacent to other city properties of their city water available, and then it does reduce the existing amount of enclaves. The property is also consistent with the JPA future land use map, which is low-density residential. So here we have an aerial of the property with the property shown in yellow. This is the future land use map indicating the low-density residential of the property and its surrounding areas. And this is the zoning map indicating those adjacent city properties. So staff did meet last week for a Development Review Committee meeting, and we recommend approval for the annexation from the county into the city and the rezoning of the property from R2 to City R1. And that concludes my presentation. The applicant is not present, but I'm here for any questions.
Great, thanks. Any questions for staff? All right, the applicant's not here. We'll open it up to the dais. Anybody want to speak? Close the dais, bring it back up. I'll take a motion. You do want to speak? Oh, yeah, come on up. I'll open it back up to the public if you want to come up. Sorry, I didn't see you.
I live at 271 10th Avenue,
And what's your name?
Rosabelle
All right,
Johnson.
thank you.
And I got the letter and I don't want to hook up to water. I got my own well, my own septic tank.
Okay.
So is it going to be mandatory or is it?
Is this your property?
No, she's 271.
Yeah.
I'm a neighbor.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something you'd have to take up with staff. I'm not sure that we're not talking about your house this evening, so.
Oh, you're not talking about the water and the sewer? Because I got the letter.
Yeah, this was Yeah, voluntary for Mrs. Cox at 283.
Okay, so that is.
She's requesting the annexation for her property. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, ma'am. Thank you very much. Anybody else have any other questions? All right, we'll bring it back up. We'll close the public hearing, bring it back up to the dais. So now, is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the annexation AX-02-25-01.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a recommendation to approve by Member Keller and a second by Member Chacon. Let's go ahead and vote. That works. That is approved 5-0. And then for the rezoning? Need a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve rezoning RZ-25-02-01.
All right. Do you have a second?
I second it.
Okay, we have a recommendation for approval by Member Keller and a second by Member Galvin. Let's go ahead and vote. Both pass. All right. Next business is the Envision 2045 Ocoee Comprehensive Plan Large-Scale Update to replace Ocoee's comprehensive plan in its entirety. Love that word.
Chair Lomax, I would like to, this is Ginger Corliss, Development Services Director. And before Anaj takes over the presentation for the public hearing tonight on Envision 2045, I'd like to take a few moments. We were together a couple of weeks ago, which we really workshopped the item, and we went in through detail to each of the different elements and the background, as well as we had the opportunity to have discussion points. I know there were a couple of members absent, but I believe they've been up to speed now as it relates to reviewing the material that you've gotten. So before we start, I want to take a moment because, you know, I'm really proud and I'm really excited because even though you don't have your notebook, this work is really came together for over 2 years of staff working together. And I want to say when we work together, we have to do our jobs regularly all day long too. So a lot of this was done in after hours or working where we can between meetings, of doing different lunch meetings, of pulling staff together. And during this 2 years of building this Envision 25, document, we really came together as a team. And I like to say, and it sounds a little corny, but Team Ocoee, because we came together as the different departments, from Public Works and working with Seth and Virgin, as well as Mylan Womack and Public Works that relates to conservation and our drainage elements, and utilities under the leadership of Jen Bowling, from the standpoint of our water resources and sanitary sewer and infrastructure, as well as development services. And we consider staff too, our mobility element comprised, is it KHA or Kimberly Horn and Associates? They are a staff. Not only do they provide the review for our transportation projects, they really worked heavily with us on the mobility element with that. So it's really exciting to see, but I really also want to say something about the individuals here, is that every one of us came together and we learned from each other. We learned about the different disciplines. We learned about the issues that they face and working in Ocoee. But it also came to be because we had a leadership, a very strong person in Anaj Whitfield, our zoning manager.
Thank you.
She literally, and I can show you the emails to prove, were sending emails to me at 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4 in the morning. She really lived and breathed this comprehensive plan update. And we could not have done it without you.
Thank you.
And so I really wanted to make sure that she gets her recognition a little bit, because it's kind of like, I'm going to say this, it's like birthing a child when you go through this process and we all come together as a village, so to speak, to be able to create this. So I'm now going to turn it over to Anaj, and she's going to rock and roll through this.
Thank you. Okay. As long as the technology works. 1 second. Okay. All right, good evening. Mr. Chairman, I will leave it up to you as far as breaks. We have 132 slides. For the benefit of the few residents or property owners or audience members, the general public here, we will go over some of the detail and inventory and analysis slides in a little bit more detail than just gleaning over them since you all have seen it prior. So, Envision 2045. It's required by statutes basically to update what we currently have. So what we currently have is a comp plan that was adopted in 2002. It follows the traditional statutory future land use, transportation, housing, infrastructure, conservation, rec and open space, intergovernmental coordination, capital improvements, elements, and then schools and private property rights were added on after the adoption of the 2002 plan. But fundamental to why we need to do this massive overhaul is that all of the data that's in the current comp plan, which I believe there's a copy of it behind you there, it's 1999, 98, early 2000s, a lot of 2000 census information, so it all needed to be updated. So when the state requires us to update our comprehensive plan, it's not a matter of just changing the date on the binder cover. It's all the data that supports it as well. So in the process of doing that and looking at, when I started here in 2021, Mr. Rumor had asked me to look at the city's evaluation and appraisal report and all the previous studies that the commission had adopted in 2017 time period. And we felt that the city was ready to transition into a more urban environment. So we reorganized the comp plan into chapters based on focus areas that were identified in the year and the public feedback that was received during that year process. So on this slide, you'll see that the future land use, housing, and recreation elements have been grouped under a vibrant, attractive, and inclusive community. The goal there is land use needs to tie to housing, needs to tie to recreation, because we all want to be able to live and grow and thrive where we live. And then infrastructure, we have the utilities sub-element, which includes potable water, wastewater, and reclaimed water, and then the drainage sub-element, which captures stormwater. And then Chapter 4 by itself is mobility. Chapter 5 by itself is conservation, making sure that we're growing, but we're growing sustainably. And then 6 is governance, everything relative to how we negotiate and work with our partners, such as Orange County Public Schools. The intergovernmental coordination element requires us to do that. The capital improvements element just basically is the checks and balances of the comp plan, and then the private property rights, which we're not proposing any changes to. So as Ginger mentioned, this is a long haul, and this is a very broad picture. All the colors, the darker colors are the chapters, the lighter colors are the elements. The second column, third column here in white are all the statutory references that we have to follow and make sure that the comp plan includes each one of those references, or the guidance and requirements that those references outline in statutes. So you can't read this, but it's in the packet if anybody in the audience wants to read it. So we're going from a very large, I don't know, can you grab the big binder, the comp plan binder behind you? I meant to have it up here, but I totally forgot. The big binder?
I'm not sure.
No, not this one.
Oh,
The big one. There should be a big one. Okay, there's not a big one. Never mind. So our current comp plan is about this thick. So the DIA and the GOPS combined is about this thick. So we've whittled it down. Oh, it's right next to me.
Just LDC.
Oh, never mind. That's just the LDC. So we've whittled it down to just this. This has 2 volumes. As you can see on the screen, the volume on the left is Exhibit A to the ordinance that's been presented to this body. Exhibit A is the what we call the GOPS, Goals, Objectives, and Policies. It is the policy framework that will be adopted. The item on the image on the right is the data inventory and analysis, which we'll go into in just a second. So again, the GOPS is what's going to be adopted. The DIA is going to be the support document for the GOPS. It all stems from, what we're doing here stems from a vision statement that the planning team came together and to develop. But the bold words there are the nuggets from each of the elements in the comp plan. Basically, I don't want to read this whole thing, but it's us trying to achieve a city that is vibrant, attractive, economically sustainable, where our businesses thrive, neighborhoods flourish, the land use patterns are diverse, compact, with complementary but different land uses, policies that set up the parameters for quality development that are connected through mobility systems. And you'll see in a little bit that our mobility systems includes pedestrians and bicyclists and transit riders. But at the same time, we don't want to grow to the detriment of our environmental resources or to our community fabric. So we are still focusing on creating those park systems and open space systems and social engagement, gathering places where our community can still grow, but grow in a healthy and active lifestyle kind of way. So that vision statement sets the framework for everything else. So the way the next series of slides are going to be is a few slides on the data, and then the goals, objectives, and policies, and the summaries of each one. And then I think maybe at the end of chapter 2, we can take a short break, Mr. Chair, if you'd like, or we can zip on through the next few chapters. So the future land use element, one of the fundamental things that is required by statutes is that we have to project out what our population is going to look like in 20 years. The statute requires that we plan for a 10-year planning horizon as well as a 20-year planning horizon. So we looked at population through comparing ourselves to how our sister cities have grown over the past 20 years, looking back. Retrospectively, Ocoee has grown about 1,100 residents per year. As you can see in this slide, we're comparable to how Winter Garden and Apopka have grown, just a little bit less, but certainly more than Oviedo, for example, and Castleberry. We also looked at just a linear extrapolation of the population. That is this graphic here on the right. If we were just to apply or add 1,145 people per year, we'd be at 74,000. This table on I lost my mouse. Here, we looked at the requirements from Bieber, which is to look at, this is just a land use analysis of all the vacant lands, and this has a stop date of 2022, which is when we started looking at the comp plan update. Just calculating our vacant lands in residential, we have about 6,100 people that we can absorb, which is far less in terms of the ability to build vacant lands than what our population is projecting that we will need. Even if we were to apply 16 units an acre, which is the highest density in the city's current future land use categories, we would still only be able to absorb another 15,000, which is still shy of the land area that we would need. We also looked at the utilities projections as far as water. As you know, we are bound by the joint planning area, so we can't annex beyond that JPA. So we are going to try to plan for everything that's inside of that JPA geographic area. So the joint planning area is projecting a population of 74,000 and change. Then the last methodology that we looked at is population based on the transportation model. So the regional transportation model is a mechanism that is developed by Metroplan Orlando. It takes into consideration all of the 3 counties and the municipalities in each of those 3 counties, their future land use categories and their comp plans and the existing built environment, and it sort of extrapolates what growth would look like based on those various scenarios. The column number 7 basically takes into account all the vested trips, all projects that are in the queue, and then just general growth in terms of a percentage of growth each year, and it comes to 74,500. Statutes also requires that we look at Bieber, so those are the Bieber numbers. Bieber still considers us a small rural community, but trends show that we're not going to remain that way. EDR is just another means of the state asking us to look at population. So looking at that, we're complying with state's requirements to at least look at those requirements. So this last summary of findings are all the population projections, and we, as a team, decided to go with the 74,500. So I'll go through these very quickly. You saw this a month or so ago. The goal of the future land use amendment, as I mentioned, is how do we grow healthily and sustainably. The first objective is the future land use map. Every comprehensive plan in the state of Florida has to have a future land use map. And that map is, it identifies the different categories. It defines what density, which is units per acre, what that means, what intensity, floor area ratio, how much commercial or non-residential development can go on a piece of property, how maximum development potential is determined, clarifying that even though we are proposing some increases in the density ranges, those are not entitlements. They will still have to meet code as far as what can actually be built. The second objective is the different categories. As I mentioned, we have your typical residential and non-residential. With this comp plan update, to address the need for the ability to absorb the population, we're looking at creating 2 new land use categories. The first one is a mixed use category, and then the second one is a low medium density residential. We currently have low, medium, and high. This is introducing another, a transitional category between low, between low and medium, so it's low, medium. And then there's specific provisions in there as far as how a project can get a density bonus. As I mentioned, the adjustments in the densities, and then how density can be done in the professional, office, commercial, and industrial land use categories through a mixed-use development. And then there's a note here, it's just, as Ginger just mentioned, we're doing the LDC update as well. So that's gonna guide how it actually gets laid out on the ground. So part of the comp plan update for the future land use element, we're looking at applying the mixed use category to the downtown district, which is this brown area here. This table is basically our GIS staff looked at all the parcel data and gave me numbers on the total acres for everything you see in brown. This second row here, 6.79 acres, is vacant commercial. This one is 67 residential, vacant residential land use categories. If every square inch of those acreages were built without any consideration for parking, infrastructure, and other, stormwater, those things, it could be built up at 887,000 square feet or 1,300 units. But again, this doesn't count everything that's, there's conservation lands that are in there. This is just straight acreage. None is not, it's gross, it's not net developable. So then we did the same thing for the CRA area. So you're looking at 15.8 million, which is good because we want our CRA to grow, and then 2,000 units. So Flume Objective 3, it just outlines the process for changing the colors on the map. We currently do not have a clear process. This objective sets that clear process. And then 4 is managing growth. We want to make sure that we're directing those higher densities to areas that are already served by municipal services or plan to be served by municipal services. And again, the whole premise of this objective is to grow sustainably. Same thing with Objective 5, looking at the context-sensitive multimodal transportation in the mobility element, and looking at a 15-minute city in terms of what's built around you. 6 is fostering economic vitality. That is a statutory requirement. We are obligated by statutes to look at how we can make sure that the city is growing in an economically feasible way. 7 is tying to the conservation element, which is to create policies that help us protect our natural resources, but allow our residents to live in active, healthy communities that are walkable. You'll see in the next future land recreation element, there's the conversation and the policies that Ginger's put in as far as the 10-minute walk to get to a public park or some sort of urban space, urban civic open space. And then engineering principles, we want to make sure that our policies are flexible enough to allow someone coming in to, maximize their development potential, but utilize innovative engineering practices to protect our resources, such as low-impact development, LEED, LEED type developments, and definitely making sure that we are still being flood resilient. So that's future land use. Going quickly now into the housing element, still part of Chapter 2, achieving that inclusive, attractive community. We have the housing element data analysis, and you'll see that the data here stops at 2002. because we have to use the best available data, which is our census information. And we looked at basically the vacancy status of all of our housing units, the different types of housing tenure. Tenure relates to whether you own your house or you're renting you own where you live or you're renting where you live. So right now, as you can see at this table, the majority of our residents are home owners. There's a small percentage who are tenants. We also looked at the existing housing inventory. As I mentioned last year, Miranda went through that tedious exercise of looking at every single permit that was pulled for single family and multifamily from 2002. So we looked at that, and then we looked to see, quick comparison of the past couple of years, comparing that to our population projections, adding it all together to show that we don't have the land capacity at our current rate to absorb the housing demand. So we have to look at increasing those densities and looking at verticality and things like that. Because again, we are still bound by the JPA. We can't grow beyond that. The housing goal primarily is to provide adequate supply of safe, affordable housing quality. And in this instance, the way the housing element is written now compared to what the current element has is more about eliminating substandard housing, looking at substandard living conditions, affordable housing units. This element now takes it a step further. It's making sure that everybody in the city, regardless of your age, your ability levels, the goal here is to provide different housing types or typologies to meet the different stages of life for all of our residents, from those graduating from high school, wanting to stay and not go off to college. They also, they're first-time home buyers, retirees or small families, growing families, divorcees, all those types of, different stages of life require you to look at how your living environment. So this element is meant to look at all of that, not just substandard housing and affordable housing. Objective number 1, attractive city. You've heard this before. For members of the audience, what the team came up with is to live here, grow here. We want the city to be built up, the built environment to be attractive so that when you're born here, you want to stay here. Or if you visited here, you've heard of Ocoee, you want to move here and you want to grow here and for your businesses to thrive here. So it requires in policy that we look at our housing stock on a biennial basis, that we make sure that we're incentivizing a diversity in the housing typologies, making sure that housing is placed within short distances of shopping, recreation, making sure your personal needs are met, medical, like pharmacies, the doctor's offices, things like that. So still being active. If you can drive to pick up your prescription, if you can walk to pick up your prescription and stop at the park along the way, that's better than just hopping in the car and driving there. But at the same time, we want to protect our residential character. And this objective is not just protecting the residents that's there, but it's also the character of the environment. So there are policies in there that speaks to helping our residents make sure they have resources to eliminating substandard housing conditions, helping them to improve their aesthetics, the buildings, the soundness of their buildings, and their properties as well. Improving housing quality and diversity. As I mentioned, we need a distribution, because if you look at the future land use map and the zoning map now, it's yellow all over. The majority of it is yellow. You also have in the DIA document, there are a series of maps in there that shows the market values of all the different residences in the city. We base that on the property appraiser's market rate value in the OCPA website. And you'll see it's kind of generally evenly distributed, and we broke that out by 250 and under, 250 to 500, 500 to 750, and then over $750,000 in housing value. So we looked at that, and we want to make sure that our policies encourage that continued diversity of mixes. An objective on affordable housing statutes. It's a required statute that we provide housing for very low, moderate income households, and that they have the ability to get to their daily needs. Statutes also requires that, and we would want to meet our senior special population housing. So Bernice is in the back. She went through a bunch of research, and what she found is that Ocoee's population is trending towards older, 40 to 49, and then 65 plus. So we do need to look at making sure that we're protecting the ability of our seniors to live here and age in place, and not just live here, but age with dignity in place. So that's a very important factor that we want to make sure that we include. Protecting our historic resources and structures. This is a brand new objective to the housing element. There's a series of policies there that identifies and lists, and we mapped the historic sites and structures, and we want to make sure that there are protocols in place to when it's time to repair them or things like that. So that was housing. The last element in Chapter 2 is recreation open space. So Ginger has a bunch of slides here, and it's full of information. You've seen it before, and for the audience, I'll just go through them very quickly. We basically looked at all the existing inventory. Mark, Mr. Johnson, Parks Director, he and his team went out, they counted everything. So all of that is inventoried and is in the DIA document that you have. The direction that the city's going now is trying to get Ocoee, based on our 74,000 population, to meeting the median benchmark of the National Parks and Recreation Association manual. So based on that, the Parks team is updating the level of service for our residents for Parks and Open Space, but there's also a mission to getting us beyond that in terms of the number of parks per 1,000 residents. I don't think we want to go through all this data, so zip on through. Ginger had our GIS team map everything, all the existing parks, planned trails, parks by different facility types. So all of that is here. They also looked at where the parks are located and their buffer of service areas to see if there are any gaps in service. So all these maps show that. So as I mentioned before, previously, there's the 10-minute walk. The purpose of this is that a 10-minute walk is basically a half mile. It would be easy to just take a 10-minute walk to take your children to go play at the park. We should not have to drive to get to the park. Let's see, this is all level of service. Just to highlight very quickly, our current level of service is 4 acres per 1,000. The city is aiming to go to 8. We are already at 8.2, but we're trying to get better than what we currently have. Looking at all the different facilities that we have, the trail systems, Ginger has poured a lot of information into here. I would encourage members of the audience to read through this if you haven't already. So the goal of the parks element, the parks and recreation, the recreational open space element, is making sure that our park system is sustainable and that it's connected, that it's accessible, that it's inclusive, and that it's sustainable. Again, you'll hear these repeating words because that's the overall vision of the comp plan, is our ability to meet the needs of our residents at all stages of life and all abilities. So objective number 1 is putting those policies in place for a comprehensive system. Again, as I mentioned, first one is establishing the level of service. Objective 2 is health and well-being, making sure that opportunities are there for our residents to live healthy, active lifestyles. Objective 3 is making sure that our park systems are connected and accessible, convenient for all mode users. Providing shade, meeting we are in Florida. It's either hotter, or hot and wet. There's very little coolness in Florida. So facilities planning and development, it's not enough to put policies in place to just want these things. The objective in number 4 is, and those policies are to identify how do we get a consistency in our park systems? How do we eliminate cultural and architectural barriers? How do we employ nature-based solutions? Looking at the use of partnering with elementary schools and middle schools and employing safety standards for our park systems. Resource management and sustainability is objective number 5. So again, it's just going, it goes back to preserving our park system, but also making them safe. One thing in here, there's a few policies in here that ties to the conservation element. Florida, we all know, is a giant karst feature. So whatever we do on the top of the dirt eventually makes its way down into our aquifer, and that includes what we do in our park systems as well. So there are policies in here to make sure that our development activities still look to protecting our aquifer from a parks perspective. And then can't have parks without funding, so there are funding policies and objectives and some of the other elements as well. So that's chapter 2. I can go ahead and move into chapter 3, which is infrastructure, unless you want to.
You guys want to get through chapter 3 and then we'll take a break?
I'm okay with that. That
Okay.
works. Yep.
So we'll go ahead and zip on through chapter 3. The infrastructure element is required by statutes. In statutes, you'll see that it also includes solid waste. Based on conversations with Orange County, who is where we send our landfill to, they've confirmed that they've got plenty of capacity for us for 40 years. So we didn't feel the need to specifically add it into our little 20-year plan. So the infrastructure element is separated into 2 sub-elements, utilities and drainage. So in the utilities team, they looked at making sure that the city's water supply plan and consumptive use permit is in line with the Central Florida Water Inventory. I'm looking at Jen. I think I said that right, Central Florida Water Inventory. Initiative. So they're charged with making sure that the city's demands and water demand and water consumption is staying in line with what our commitments are with St. John's. So that is what all of these numbers are relative to, and based on the population that we discussed earlier. A slight nuance between the future land use element population projection and the projections for water demand in the utilities element is because not the entirety of the city's jurisdictional boundaries is served by the city's water system. Some of it, a good chunk of it, is actually still on water wells. So you won't see a direct, the population numbers aren't going to be exactly the same. Same thing with sewer and reclaimed water. Look at that, it's right there on the screen, initiative. Water demands, these are numbers from our utilities department. The projections are there for what they're trying to meet. As I mentioned, the number here is a little bit less because we don't serve the entirety of the city, but we also still serve some areas that are outside of the city's geographic limits. And I'm going to make sure that Jen knows to correct me if I misspeak up here. Water demand over time, sewer, same thing, 92% of additional sewer population was assumed at 92% of the city's new water consumers. So this is a table that reflects that. Another graphic depiction. And then the utilities element. So the way the utilities sub-element goals are designed is the first few objectives speaks to all 3 of the utility services, water, sewer, and reclaim. And then the last couple of them deal specifically with water and then sewer and then reclaim. So the primary objective is to make sure that we have the ability to meet the growing demands on our city system. So right now and moving forward, the city will be looking to new development to connect to central sewer services, except under very specific limited circumstances. And the new development would have to pay for its cost of upsizing and expansions, and then plans and implement utility upsizing using hydraulic modeling analysis. Objective 2 establishes the user fees. There are protocols in place in our policy for that. Objective 3 now specifically deals with water, is to maintain the water level of service. Objective 4 is water conservation, so it's not enough to just make sure that we have the water supply. Part of the water supply plan and meeting the requirements of St. John's is that we look at our water conservation activities as well. So promoting the efficient use of water, water conservation plan, things of that nature. Water supply planning, we have to coordinate with St. John's, Central Florida DEP, and other agencies. We have to develop the 10-year water supply facilities work plan within 18 months of the CFWI adopting their plan. Provision for wastewater, very similar in context, content and flow relative to potable water, setting the standard and putting the policies in place to make sure that we meet those standards over time. Objective 7 is basically focused on reducing our nutrient load in our water systems, in our water basins, through what we put on the ground and then going through into the water system. Oh, going back to this really quickly, the acronyms that you see here in the document, the long document, there is an acronyms list at the end. And there are some very informative maps as well there on on-site sewer treatment and disposal systems and the BMAPs, basin management action plans. So those maps will be very useful for you to look at later on. Objective 8 is reclaim, similar format, looking at providing how we can best provide reclaimed water service. So that was utilities. Very quickly, drainage is the second sub-element. The city engineer and public works director looked at the existing drainage sub-element. And then they looked at other example local governments to see how best to update our sub-element. So with that, they created a series of basin maps. We now have 17 sub-basins. And so these maps are also in your packet, looking at soils, looking at floodplains and karst features, making sure that we've identified these via GIS so that when projects come in, we can look to these maps as resources to make sure that developments are not impacting these areas. So the goal for the drainage sub-element, first and foremost, is stormwater management. We want to make sure that we meet the requirements of FEMA, St. John's, EPA, all of those state and federal agencies over the next 20-year planning horizon. Policies are in place to update the city's stormwater management plan, to looking at identifying basin-specific watershed protection measures through the next 20 years and continuing to implement our stormwater. Water quality, again, these are all technical requirements from the various federal and state agencies, making sure that we're monitoring our water levels, pollutant levels, things like that. One important thing here, number 3, is creating and implementing strategies to reduce ISA and minimizing site disturbance. So ISA is impervious surface area. So when you have impervious surface area, if you have natural ground, when rain comes or whatever, it just works its way down naturally. When you have impervious area, it disperses that water and it sheet flows more quickly into a direction. So if we reduce that and reduce the amount of site disturbance, it'll help us to protect our aquifer recharge abilities. Flood resiliency is important. You'll see this echoed in the conservation element, making sure that we are putting measures in place to make sure that we build in a flood resilient manner. Agency coordination that is required. We need to make sure we coordinate with all the agencies, and that is chapter 3.
All right, so before we take a break, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up. I'm going to open up the dais. I'm going to open it up to public comments. Is there anybody that has any questions so far? We will have public comments again before we're finished, but I figured we'd break it up. So does anybody have any questions? All right, we'll close it back up, bring it to the dais. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and finish her up. All right, staff, let's quiet it down over there, okay? Come on. All right, let's go. We will open it up to questions again at the end of the last chapter. So.
Mic is not on. Okay, sorry. The mobility element, this was the transportation element. Amanda here in the front in black is our transportation consultant. She did a deep dive into our existing road network, access management, maintenance responsibilities, all those things, the existing levels of service on each of those, on all of our roadways. And Kimberly Horn has been the one that has been keeping track of our concurrency management system relative to transportation. So there's a massive Excel spreadsheet that lists all the projects that have been approved, that have not yet been constructed, so that we are keeping tabs on those trips. Context classification is the direction that we're going towards in terms of making sure that we look at transportation from the context of the environment that the project is located on. Context classification comes from DOT, and I'm going to try very, very hard to decipher all the information that Amanda's put in these slides. So basically, there are different kinds of classifications on roadways that DOT assigns based on the context of the existing land uses around those roadways. And there are three that are essentially here in Ocoee. There's C3R, suburban residential, C3C is suburban commercial, and then urban. The map on the right-hand side here, it sort of delineates where those roadways are. And then it sets the levels of service for each of those context class types based on trips and based on the number of directional lanes. So the existing level of service in 2023 in the city, basically all the roads are operating at a level of service E. I think E is in our current comp plan. We are currently operating at E with the exception of McGuire from Park Ridge Gotha to Tolman, which is ours. Good Homes from 50 to White, which is the county's, and then State Road 50, which is of course the state, from 9th to State Road 429. Ocoee does have some constrained roadways, so we have to take that into consideration. So in those scenarios, you have to look at operational improvements in lieu of widening. It could be signal timing, it could be decel, accel lanes, looking at access management, looking at other connections so that the traffic isn't going on the major roadways. Then through a series of meetings with Mike Rumer when he was our director, we sat with Kimberly Horn through a series of meetings to look at the road improvements that the city has planned from now through 2034. There are widening improvements, realignment improvements, additional facility improvements, and then they prepared a map. We shared that data with Public Works to make sure that those road improvements are consistent with what Public Works has in their plans. And so that is the this slide. And the colors on the roads indicate the number of lanes. So with these road improvements planned here in 2034, this slide tells us the status of our facilities in 2034. 2034 is a date set in time that we selected because we were hoping last year to get this adopted in 24. So per statute, we had to look out 10 years. Basically, what her data and analysis has shown is that we basically are meeting level of service, or we will be meeting level of service, except for 3 roads in our jurisdiction, 4 in the county's jurisdiction, and again, 50 is still going to always be congested. Then looking at 2045 improvements, widening and realignments, the list is there, and then this is the map showing the facilities that will not be operating at acceptable standards that's in the city. So still Clark, McGuire, and Owen Garden. You see here Owen Garden is listed twice. Part of it is ours, part of it is the county's. In the DIA portion, we also looked at transit service. This slide basically tells existing transit service in the city. Lynx is our transit service provider, and there are no plans to continue or to broaden Lynx service to Ocoee. And then new to the transportation element, which is why we're calling it the mobility element. It's a shift to looking at putting an emphasis and a priority on bicycle and pedestrian safety. You recall last year there was the Vision Zero effort that Ocoee participated in, as well as Orange County and other jurisdictions. So we wanted to make sure that we are continuing to look at putting policies in place to protect our more vulnerable users, which are bicyclists and pedestrians. So the direction that we're going to with the mobility element is looking at the level of stress that the bicyclist or the pedestrian feels, or their comfort level when they're walking or cycling along the roadway. So in this scenario, 1 is good, 4 is bad. Based on Amanda's analysis of our current systems, most of our facilities are operating at 2 to 4. The goal that we're trying to set is 2. So for a bicyclist, 2 is basically the average condition that's tolerated by most adults. And there's a similar thing for pedestrians that you'll see in a minute. And this table here, these tables on the right, shows the facility types, if there are bicycle facilities present and if there's bicycle facilities not present. So it looks at posted speed, travel lanes, the land uses around there, and the vehicle trips. AADT is annual average daily trips. Same thing for the pedestrian level of stress. Again, it looks at the comfort level that the pedestrian feels when they're walking on the roadway. As I mentioned, LTS 2 is what we are hoping, we're setting our level of service for pedestrians. As I mentioned previously, most of our facilities are 2 to 4 for bikes and 3 to 4 for pedestrians, but we want to get them all to 2, which falls in line with the future land use objectives and policies and the Parks and Recreation objectives and policies about creating those connected, safe cities where residents and visitors can actually safely get to where they're going through multimodal methods, but in a safe way. So with that, the mobility objective is, again, to provide a resilient and logically connected system. Context-sensitive standards, as I mentioned, a level of service, we're still keeping the LOSE, but it's LOSE based on context, and also new level service standards for bike ped based on level of stress experienced by them. The policies in this objective speaks to making sure that we're maintaining a walkable mile, a quarter mile that's walkable for households to trails and public transit. Strategies to create parallel connections or interconnections. You'll see in the code we're looking at not allowing cul-de-sacs because basically cul-de-sacs at the end of the day, they just funnel all the trips from that development onto the main road. The more connected the grid is, the more travel choices people have, and the better it makes our level of service, our operating level of service for our roadway systems. Safety and resiliency is objective number 2 in the mobility element, looking at the engineering principles and emphasizing the different types of mode users, looking at that micro-mobility to create those last half-mile connections, and then looking at developing a transportation plan to integrate the needs of all of the mode users, not just cars, but non-motorist and motorist travel. Objective 3 is coordination. And here is not coordination with other agencies per se, it's coordination between the transportation plan and the land use plan. So it requires that when we have new applications for development or applications for future land use map amendments or rezonings, whatever the case may be, we are looking at the transportation system in line with that project and making sure that that project doesn't cause our systems to fail. I believe Public Works and GIS are working together now to identify gaps in sidewalks. So we'll be looking to that information to create those opportunities where gaps are missing or existing so that we can put in those missing sidewalks. So objective 4 deals with having a physically efficient transportation system in terms of where we invest our resources. As I mentioned, one of the key policies in this objective is to actually identify and map those right-of-way needs so that as new projects come online, we can look at the map, the right-of-way needs map, and see, oh, the plan is to widen this road area, this road in this segment area. So when Mr. Developer comes in, we can discuss how can we plan for that widening or that road improvement down the line. It may be by rights-of-way dedication or easements or whatever it is, so that when he is or she is investing the dollars towards site design, it's with the right-of-way needs in mind, so that the building, when it's built, isn't 10 feet from the future right-of-way or something like that. So as I mentioned, funding. Like parks, can't have parks without funding, can't have roads without funding. So those policies and this element speaks to how we're going to work with our partners and agencies to get funding for transportation. So that is chapter 4. I'm going to go ahead and go into chapter 5, which is conservation. Lots of maps and data in this series of slides as well. Where is that? Seth is there, floodplains, public works. They've mapped out pretty much everything, floodplains, wetlands, the riverine system. We've looked at pretty much all of the natural resources. If you look in Florida statutes 163, 3177, it lists out for the conservation element all of the different natural resources that our comp plan is supposed to look at. So this comp plan update does that. It looks at all those different natural resources. Floodplains, special hazard areas, conservation open space areas. You've seen the table on the left before when we brought the flood management ordinance to you last year. Looking at all the different basins and looking at lakes, aquifer recharge areas, everything is mapped now. Soils play a big deal as far as, where we should be directing growth. We want to make sure we protect our type A soils, which are the high recharge areas where the water, what we do on the ground, very definitely affect the aquifer. So the goal of the conservation element is basically the name. Conservation of our natural resources. And there are, I think, 5 or 6 objectives in this element. The first one is to minimize development impacts on our natural resources, looking at increasing the night sky access to everybody. We want to be able to look up and see the stars, water demand, water consumption, reducing the waste of water, decreasing water consumption through water conservation strategies, prioritizing water quality. One of the policies, for example, is to look at using the lower quality waters first for like irrigation and things like that, and then saving the higher quality water, potable water, as a last resource. So again, going back to making sure that we're compliant with our consumptive use permit and the requirements of St. John's. There are also policies in here that speaks to reducing the bioaccumulation of hazardous materials and pollutants into our water system, looking at an urban forest management plan to try to increase our tree canopy. You may have heard before, we've done an inventory. We have about 30% of the city canopy that's in place now. The goal is to try to get that to 50% by 2045. Water quality protection, going back to what you've heard before, complying with looking at BMAP and PDES. Again, all these acronyms are on the acronyms list. Looking at innovative design practices and design solutions so that we aren't just building your status quo, very engineering rectangles and squares and surface parking and stormwater just gets tucked in the back and is unattractive. We want to make sure that bioswales and nature or natural-based resources are used so that the development itself can be maximized, but we're also protecting our resources. Objective 3 speaks specifically to wetlands and floodplains. So we want to adopt the Ocoee Wetlands and Floodplains Conservation Map to protect the wetlands, floodplains, and hydric soils, or to replace wetlands when they're impacted. and then adopting specific standards in the Land Development Code to help direct development away from sensitive areas and habitat, including foraging locations for our wildlife. And then implementing or continuing to implement the floodplains management ordinance. Species and habitat protection, it's still important, and it's required by the state that we look at protecting our natural resources through wildlife protection and habitat protection. Air quality, statutory requirement, we have to meet EPA, FDEP, Orange County, and Metro Plan Orlando's requirements as far as maintaining air quality. I don't know why I thought there was one more after that, but that is chapter 5. And if, Mr. Chair, if you want, the next 3 elements are pretty quick. We can go ahead and zip through those. Public schools, not too much change there. We did update the data. This slide basically provides the student generation rates based on the different types of units and square footages of units. This is the school district's current school impact fee schedule. We pulled that off of their website, and just some pictures of the 3 schools that we have in our immediate city boundaries. The level of service, this is countywide enrollment. These are just a list of the schools that they are planning. You kind of have to know somebody who knows somebody to know what these little numbers and letters mean. So
if you want to, do you know what it is? I'm sorry.
I believe the E is for elementary, M is middle, and H is high.
Yes.
But the W is, I believe, west, southeast, and southwest. So you see there's a bunch of southwest, so we know where that's going. OCPS also provides their 10-year enrollment, which they have here. This is countywide, not specific to Ocoee, but we did look at, put together a table of just those school concurrency service areas that touch Ocoee in some way. So there are, I didn't count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 16? 12 or 16 there. And these are OCPS's numbers, and based on this table, only Gotha is not meeting their level of service. So schools element, generally the same as what we have now. We're still keeping concurrency for schools, even though the state did away with it. We're still operating under the interlocal agreement with OCPS. We still send comp plan amendments and rezoning applications and subdivision plans to OCPS to get their input. We don't take anything to final issuance of an approved site plan or an approved for an apartment complex, for example, or an approved subdivision plan for residential to the city commission until we get the green light from OCPS for school capacity. Alternative mitigation is basically working with OCPS to, if a project were to cause something to fail, it's giving development a chance to work with the city and work with the school board to look at alternative means of providing school capacity. So those policies are in objective 2. School facilities planning, again, working with the school board's 10-year district capital outlay plan. And then 4 is new, is continuing education facilities, because, for those who may have circumstances that where they didn't finish their high school education, we want to put in policies in place to encourage partnerships with, technical colleges, universities, any of those agencies to help provide continuing education resources to our residents. So this objective is not saying that the city will provide educational opportunities. It's just saying that we will work to provide resources that we can help point our residents to so they can get the continuing education that they need. It also speaks to looking at the Land Development Code to allow provisions for like trade schools or vocational schools. Right now, schools require a special exception, regardless of whatever type of school it is, whether it's a grade school, elementary school, or a vocational school. It still goes through a special exception. So we're looking to remove those barriers to providing continuing education. And the intergovernmental coordination, generally in the same, it's required by state law that we make sure that we maintain relationships and we coordinate what we do with our neighbor jurisdictions. So as I mentioned in the last presentation, traffic doesn't stop. Like if you're driving, you don't stop because you've hit the city boundary. It just keeps going. If you have flooding situation or your project creates flooding, the water's not going to stop at the city limits. So we want to make sure that we're coordinating with the state agencies, the county as needed, and the regional authorities as needed. So making sure there's efficiency in governance. We don't want to duplicate what another jurisdiction is doing. We also don't want to reinvent the wheel. If another jurisdiction is doing something great, then we can talk to them and get some ideas from them. We want to make sure that our development impacts are coordinated. And then we want to make sure that we're continuing our relationships with our utility providers and any agreements that we have with other agencies. Again, coordinating with public schools, this ties back to the schools element. And that's that. CIE, very much the same. The changes here are basically to update the prioritization policies for how capital projects are prioritized in terms of their ranking. Statute requires that the capital improvements plan includes all projects that are needed to meet level of service, their funding sources, whether that is funded or unfunded, whether the funding is public or private, the ranking that those projects received through the budgeting process. So all of that is now detailed in these policies. Proportionate cost. So development basically needs to pay for its proportionate cost of their impacts to the city's resources. And by this resource, I mean public facilities and infrastructure. And fiscal responsibility is just really making sure that we maintain the ability, because we are a municipal body, we maintain our ability to provide water, transportation, sewer, reclaim, solid waste through Orange County, and recreational facilities to our residents over the next 20-year time period. And that is the last slide.
All right.
I forgot the
Nope.
most important slide in here that says that we are recommending that you make a recommendation of approval. That's a very bad omission right there.
You mean you did all that work and you don't,
You don't want to.
I can just type it in very quickly. Please recommend approval.
all right, anybody have any questions for staff?
I do have one, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
When we talk about the sidewalks, and the gaps in them, are we including gaps created by the enclave? Or are we just talking strictly city?
I'll have to ask Mylan to answer what they're inventorying, but the way I think Development Services is looking at it, and Ginger can speak if I'm incorrectly speaking, if the road is ours and we have the ability to create those connections, even if the land around it is county, we would look to make those connections.
And is there, and I guess the follow-up on that, is there any statutes, the state statutes or anything, where if we're looking to do that and it's on quote-unquote county land, that they do have to help us provide for the cost of that? Or is that just something that we're going to have to work out with the county?
So before Mylan speaks to the inventory that his team is doing, there is this thing called PROAG. It comes down from the federal government, the Federal Highway Administration, and then it trickles down to DOT and the different agencies, the cities and counties, is that we have to meet Title VI and the ability for persons with disabilities to access, to have a safe route. So that is something that cities are required to do and that counties are required to do. So while we are able to make our connections, the county is also obligated to make their connections.
Yeah, to go back to your question about our inventory, this is on, we're starting with, we're inventorying everything, even the sidewalks in our parks, So we have a pretty good map in GIS right now that shows where all those sidewalks are and where the gaps are. We're gonna start in the areas that, obviously that we see a lot of pedestrian traffic in that are public right-of-ways. So anything that's a public right-of-way is what we're able to, go to first. Kind of going to your question there about the enclaves, if it's not the city's right-of-way, then yes, we would have to work with the county to see, what they can do in those areas where those gaps are. But we would start in our own right-of-ways and start in the areas that we have high pedestrian traffic, creating those little paths that, okay, we see we have the sidewalk here, we need to connect, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
All right.
Brian.
All right, at this point, we'll open it up to the public. Is there somebody who wanted to speak? Come on up, make sure you fill the form out, okay? Cool.
Yes, we have it.
This chair is either like laid back as a bed or it's straight up. Say your name and enter the record.
Manuel Ortiz, 415163 McGuire Road. Just 2 points I would like to point out to the staff and to the City Commission concerning Vision 2045. First point, it to me, for individuals or developers that had plans already in the works prior to the moratorium. For example, us on that property, we had pre-app meetings consistent with, this is not approved yet, so with current zoning and flu requirements, especially after much reliance and conversation with city staff months prior to the moratorium going in, and not getting the submissions in before the moratorium kicked in. So the first question would be, what about those of us who are in the process of submitting formal applications after working with city staff for months and taking on significant costs already? What remedies are there for us, or ways that we can work under the current zoning and flu requirements versus unknowns right now of what's coming down the pike? Second, getting to what's coming down the pike, is the concern about the lack of clarity on Vision 2045, especially what's coming down, especially regarding what would be required under the proposed MU allowable uses. Namely, I want to reference the GOP policy framework, specifically page 2 of the CPA GOP policy frameworks, future use, specifically flu policy 2.2. The mixed-use future land use designation is intended to apply to urban areas targeted for dense and intense urban developments. Development within the MU category should not exceed a density of 20 dwelling units per acre or an intensity of 3.0. Development on lands designated mixed use shall contain a mix of 2 or more land uses, which shall consist of a residential component plus 1 or more of the following uses, whether commercial, office, recreation, craft industrial, and assembly uses, plus at least 1 ancillary civic use, such as plaza, mini park, community urban garden, or other public gathering spaces. So the question is, under the above provision that I just read, it is rather unclear whether it will always require a residential component, or if it's just one of the 3 following options. Is it residential and/or commercial, office, recreation, craft industrial, or assembly use? Or is it an and/or ancillary civic use, such as a plaza, mini park, community, urban garden, or other public gathering spaces? So trying to figure out what is required on mixed use. Is it residential and commercial, office, recreation? And adding that word also. So I think it's figuring out where the and/or also go into the mixed use. It's rather unclear as we read it. I'll give you an example concerning 51 McGuire. Can we do commercial and a mini park? Are those 2 options allowed in that subject property? Does it have to be residential and retail? Can it be craft industrial in a park? I think it's rather unclear as we see it now. Also, we would like to see clear definition of this term as is currently defined in the LDC. It's also unclear whether these specific uses will fall under the existing LDC regulations for the respective uses, or whether the LDC conditions will also be amended given that there is no current MU zoning designation. So I say all that to ask the following question. Will we then be put on hold for several more months or longer in addition to the prior moratorium before we can get this clarity to then completely replan our efforts and spend some more couple $100,000 on top of the couple million to acquire the property to figure out what we can do on this property? Because right now we're at a standstill. And I just remind you, as developers, we want to make things look nice, we want to make things look useful, but we're like water. In other words, we move in the path of least resistance. If it's always a no or it's unclear, we have timetables, so we have to move and we have to act. So we would like some clarity so we can move and do something nice. I thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have any other questions for staff? You want to make a comment on that, or are you good?
Yes, I would.
Well, okay.
So the property I pulled this slide back up. 51 McGuire, if you are able to see my mouse,
Yep.
is right to the left, right here. This
The old
right here,
Crittenden property,
here.
right? It's Crittenden property? No?
It's right here. It's these,
Oh, yeah.
right next
Yep.
to the railroad track on McGuire. Its address is 51, but there are two other parcels. The little triangular wedge-shaped piece that's right adjacent to the property. So it is in the downtown area where we're proposing to provide the mixed-use land use category and the mixed-use zoning district when that comes along. There are some nuances to this property. One, even if this mixed-use category were not applied, it is already inside of the Plant Street character area, which the City Commission adopted in 2017, which specifically calls out uses in the entire Plant Street character area that speaks to mixed-use, retail, mix of housing typologies, vertical integration, horizontal integration. There's also the plan that the city participated with FDOT on for the Complete Streets project for Silver Star Road, which is the state's facility. So that one, so the Plant Street covers this area, regardless of what happens with this, even regardless of the pending legislation, which allows the city to implement the code, the policies that we have here. That Plant Street character area overlay already looks to this area of the city, inclusive of these three properties, to be mixed-use retail, diversity, housing of different types, those things that we are now putting into place and codified by policy first and then in the LDC next. The State Road 438 Silver Star corridor already anticipates a cul-de-sac, I'm sorry, not a cul-de-sac, bad word, a roundabout right here, if you can see my mouse. So the south leg of that roundabout has already been planned. So the goal there is to connect the route this way, running south and then eastward to connect to McGuire to help improve the traffic of passenger traffic as well as freight traffic from State Road 429 to get to McGuire/Ocoee-Popka Road. So those plans have already been in place. Another difficulty with this threesome site is that they are not able to connect to or easily connect to the water system, sewer system to the north, that gas station. We did have a pre-app with them. They were informed by the utilities department that they would have to connect to the south. I believe it's sewer to the south. That is a challenge that exists regardless of whether or not this map is applied to the property. We have had a couple, I think I participated in at least 2 pre-apps. Each pre-app came with a different concept plan, and at each pre-app meeting, we staff shared with them the plans from the Plant Street character area requirements, the character area, the vision for the character area, the challenges in utilities and infrastructure, and the plans for making that roundabout and a connection that would sort of cut through this property. So that message has been shared with every applicant team that has been to the city pre-moratorium and post-moratorium. So that's staff's position on that one.
Okay. All right, well, anybody else? If not, we'll close the public hearing, bring it back up to the dais. Does anybody else have any other questions for staff?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. One more thing. That citation, we are looking at residential and office or commercial. So it doesn't have to be residential and commercial. It could be office and commercial or some mix. The goal is to create some mixture. There
Yeah.
is policy to, like, if it's a small acreage, we can work with them to put something that would actually work on the site.
I was gonna ask about the also word.
Yes, so it's a mix of two with an amenity, because again, it's to create those little pocket parks or those little gathering spaces. It doesn't have to be big, like a parallel parking space on the road can actually function as a pocket park. It doesn't have to take up a lot of land area. The plan that the gentleman came to the city with in this last pre-app, I believe, which was last week, that site is about 3 acres, I believe, in size. 2 buildings, office, warehouse, office industrial use. The office is 25 by 25, so very small square footage, and industrial all in the back. Buildings with a bunch of tiny little suites to put as much in there. Sidewalk around all the buildings, but there's roll-up doors on the back. So basically, the sidewalks are there for protecting the pavement, not really for pedestrian travel. And then 5 stormwater facilities to absorb the water from all that impervious surface area.
Cool. All right, nobody else, I'll take a motion.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we recommend the acceptance of the 2045 Envision 2045 Ocoee Comprehensive Plan.
Thank you very much. Do we have a second?
I second it.
All right, we have a recommendation for approval by Member Keller and a second by Member Galvin. If there's no other questions, let's go ahead and vote. All right, that passed 5-0. And so that takes care of that. Miscellaneous, we have our project status report. Any questions anybody wants to ask about anything being built in the city? Wawa opens, what, next week?
I think so, maybe. They're very close.
It's what everybody wants to know.
As
Well,
is
it's
there,
supposedly May 1st, right? Is the,
It's, I think the soft opening
yeah, I
was
think the
the
soft openings.
yeah.
week before.
I think they didn't put it April 1st, so they would be, April Fool.
The pickleball's coming back, the pickleball?
The pickleball resubmitted, but they, it was rejected because of bad paperwork, but they've resubmitted.
But they've taken care of the noise pollution and what have you.
They're going to entirely indoors, so it will not come back
all
as a
indoors.
special exception.
Looking forward to that. Should be fun.
Okay.
Yep.
Anything else? You sure? All right, thank you very much, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.